Terrorists striking London during Ramadan, the holiest month of Islam. While no group is yet taking credit, ISIS urges followers to use this time, the month of Ramadan, to launch all-out war against the West.
So why would they use their holy month as an excuse to kill? Maajid Nawaz is a former Islamic extremist and author of Radical: My Journey Out of Islamist Extremism, and he joins us now. Naweed, good to have you with us this morning. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, it's far too often these days. You understand this better than we do. Why would they want to attack on their holiest month?
Unfortunately for jihadists, they've come to fetishize the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, and in doing so they refer back to the Prophet Muhammad himself, who fought a famous battle in the month of fasting, the month of Ramadan. It's known as the Battle of Badr, and it was indeed the Prophet's first battle against his opponents and his first victory. And so jihadists today look back to that as an example for them, and that's why, unfortunately, through this fetishization every month, every year during the month of Ramadan, whereas this month used to be associated with fasting, piety, and withdrawal from worldly pleasures, jihadists have made it famous for the rest of, well, infamous, I should say, for the rest of the world, in a way that is now associated with blood, violence, and gore and barbarism.
Maajid, let's talk about the strategy here. You know, Pete had mentioned earlier, you know, encouraging others to buy this type of truck because it sits higher. You're away from gunfire. In fact, from some of the reports I read, you're up higher off the street. You can claim as many lives as you want. Going after these soft targets, bridges, crowds, festivals. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes, I think it's really important what we heard earlier on your show, that this is not just to put this, brush this aside as mindless violence. This isn't mindless violence. This is highly planned, and the strategy for this has been put out by ISIS and Al-Qaeda and other jihadist groups for a long time. They want to achieve a strategic aim through these sorts of attacks. What's that strategic aim? Well, first of all, if we understand the way insurgencies work, we have to acknowledge we're in the middle of a jihadist insurgency. Yes. Across Europe. This is the third attack in Britain in as many months. And when you're dealing with an insurgency, what do insurgents try and do? They try and divide the population between those that would support them, those that they would try and recruit from, in this case Muslims, and the rest of society. And what they want to achieve through this randomization of violence, through these sorts of marauding terrorist attacks, is to divide the population so that Muslims are pitted against non-Muslims, and that Muslims in Europe only have one option, and that is to seek sanctuary in those claiming to fight in their name, and that's the jihadists. So they have a very clear military objective here, and of course when dealing with insurgencies, we in turn have to have a counter-insurgency approach.
Yes, Maajid, and the reason people use a word like senseless is because it's young girls killed in an Ariana Grande concert. It's another young girl apparently that was stabbed by one of these attackers near the London Bridge, and they say how innocents, women, children, why? Yet for jihadists, there's no differentiation. If you could walk us through why they're willing to kill anyone, and what sort of in the Quran or elsewhere how they justify doing so.
Well, of course, any scripture, any religion that is over 1,000 years old will have passages in its scripture that today, by today's moral standards, appear totally outdated and must therefore be abandoned. And that's the same with Islam as it is with Christianity, Judaism, the Old Testament. Unfortunately, today, though, there is a bit of a tiptoeing around one particular religion when it comes to acknowledging what I've just said. And that's my own religion and faith trajectory, and that is Islam. Because we don't want to be labeled as racists or Islamophobes, we tend not to be as critical or rigorous when it comes to scrutinizing Islamic doctrine as we may be with the Old Testament or indeed the New. So jihadists will find scripture that justifies what they're doing, and what they think they're doing is that they are locked in a cosmic struggle, in a battle for civilization itself. They think they're the good guys, and they think that by killing all these people, they're provoking a war which will end up with them as victorious, and then peace and goodwill on earth. As dystopic as that sounds, that's what they believe in, and that's why they put down these strategies to divide us, so that we do end up fighting each other, so that war is provoked, and of course ISIS is the blueprint for that.
I mean, Naweed, you are a former extremist. You've written about this. You're now helping to fight this fight against terrorists. Walk us through how these, many times they're young men and women in their late teens, maybe in their early 20s. How do they get to that point of wanting to kill innocent people? What is causing them to make that transition? Because I think once you make that link, it helps us to figure out how to make sure that people, this next generation, we can stop that from happening.
Yes, and you're correct. I have an Islamist past, though I will caveat not a terrorist past. I do have an extreme past. I subscribed to the Islamist ideology, which is, in a one-sentence definition, the desire to impose any one version of Islam over society. And I start with that because, of course, if we recognize that this is a jihadist insurgency, we must recognize it begins with ideological indoctrination and recruitment from within our Muslim populations in Europe. So if Islamism is the desire to impose any one version of Islam over society, jihadism is the use of force to spread Islamism. Now, looking at that, we've got to understand, therefore, that how somebody becomes radicalized is that they may feel a sense of grievance, whether real or perceived, a disconnect from their host society. They may indeed then suffer from an identity crisis, so they stop considering themselves British, but instead consider themselves Muslim first and last, and Muslim politically as well as Muslim religiously. So the fusion between a religious and a political identity occurs, and of course then the recruiter says to them, well, you know, if you're a Muslim in politics as well as in religion, where's the state that represents your Muslim polity? Well, we need an Islamic state, and of course the rest is what ISIS are trying to bring about. So it begins with indoctrination, and if we understand it in that way, it becomes so important for us to be able to name and shame the Islamist ideology even before it gets to a stage of violence, and then isolate Islamists from mainstream Muslims. And that requires a real full spectrum, full-on civil society approach so that we can win in what is essentially an ideological war.
Civilizational approach.
That is so well put.
Yeah.
Maajid Nawaz, great to have you with us.
Thank you,
Maajid.
Maajid.
Really appreciate that insight.
Appreciate it.
A pleasure.
Thank you.